detailed in itself. You heard Rose saying I could bang on about it for days. I probably could. Don't worry, I won't. But yeah, I'll just keep it into basic ecology and conservation, an introduction to the animals for you. And perhaps if you're interested to do it further, we might do something else in the future. But there's another female adder, and you can see this one spreading herself out flat. So she looks really fat, but you can see there's not much skin between the scales. If you looked at her from the side, she wouldn't look so fat, she would look flatter. So this lady, this is right at the beginning of the spring. This was at Park Slip a few years ago on one of their refuges. So she's basking on top of something that's already been heated by the sun because it's black. So she's getting a double whammy. She's getting heat from below her and she's getting the heat pouring down on her from the sun. This is pretty early in the morning, but not so early so that the sheet hasn't had time to heat up. Okay. So she doesn't want to be basking out in the open like that for a second longer than she has to. She's there because she needs to be. It's not like when we go sunbathing, it's because she needs it to function. So most of the time, they're not out basking like that. Most of the time, they're much more secretive and a lot harder to spot. Yeah, their whole life is, and the whole functionality is based around thermoregulation, which is a posh word for moving closer to and away from heat sources as you need to. You're regulating your temperature. So thermoregulation, that's what reptiles have to do. Here's a male adder. Adders are tough snakes. There's snow on the ground next to this individual to demonstrate for you. They are incredibly tough reptiles. They're the only snake species within the Arctic Circle. This animal was photographed up in the north of England. So he's basking really early on in the year when there's still snow on the ground. So they select their basking sites. They select their hibernacula, so where they hibernate, so that they've got all the qualities they need to take full advantage of heat traps, etc., in this temperate climate. So males will emerge first. Males emerge first because they need to develop viable sperm for breeding. So they need to have so many hours of basking in and taking on UV. They need the UV light to develop viable sperm. Females, it's not just adders, all British reptiles. Females emerge later because it's just pointless. Otherwise, they'd be hassled needlessly. So yeah, you see the males first. There's 4 male adders, all basking on a Christmas day a few years ago. So while everyone's stuffing themselves with roast potatoes, etc., these guys were out basking. Yeah, climate change to do with it, but to be honest, this has probably been going on for quite some time. Whenever there is a good day's sunshine in the winter, the males, you'll notice no females, the males will emerge. It's literally just on the front doorstep because their hibernacular position is chosen for that reason. Literally just crawl out onto the front doorstep. Don't have to do much moving around. They can do what we call mosaic basking, which is when they have a portion of their body on display and a portion hidden away, and they don't do much moving and nobody notices them. This is alongside a path that hundreds of people walk past all the time, literally feet away from them, but people are generally looking forwards and upwards and not at the ground to the side at the edge of paths. So thankfully, reptiles do like edges, so they go undetected quite a lot of the time. Some people might be forgiven for thinking that these animals you're looking at were females because they're muddy brown coloration looking at them. They're not. They're males. They're males that have been hibernating for months and haven't shed their skin yet. So they're not looking at their best. They're looking a bit dull and groggy, okay? But they're most certainly all males. Here's another male. This is a Neathpot Talbot animal. You can see his eye there is very bluish tinge to it. And he's looking pretty dull as well. He hasn't got that classic black and white contrasting zigzag against the white background that everyone's used to. That's because he's about to slough, shed his skin. So he hasn't been awake from hibernation long. He's been basking, and that milky eye. Snakes don't have eyelids. They've only got one lens covering that, one scale covering the eye. So before sloughing, they release this milky fluid, which helps them separate the old skin from the new. And basically, because they've only got the one scale across the eye, it blocks it up. The fluid blocks it up and makes it go this milky color. So they can't see very well. Fortunately, sight isn't their main sense, their primary sense. It might be ours, but their primary sense is definitely their sense of smell or taste. They literally taste the air with their tongues, okay? And that tells them what's going on, and it's a good heat-seeking device as well. So for a few days, I guess they're a little bit more vulnerable because they can't see so well, but like I said, it's not their primary sense. A couple more days of this, and then the eye will become clear again, and then a couple of days after that, they will slough their skin, and they will look a lot brighter. Here's another male. He's about to slough his skin. Now you can see he's different colour. He's quite yellowish underneath that. I bet he'll look gorgeous once he has sloughed. I know that individually does. He looks very, very golden, in fact. There's great diversification, just like with people. The adders don't read the books. They haven't got a clue about the books, and you see them all kinds of. I saw one in Aberystwyth last week, a female, and she was olive green with ginger zigzag. I've only seen about 3 adders like that in my whole time, and I've seen a heck of a lot of them. So there's a lot of variety. But you can see this male, he's about to slough his skin as well. Looking pretty skinny. He's just come up for hibernation because look at his scales. You can't see any skin stretched between those scales, can you? It's quite the opposite. They're overlapping, so he needs a good feed. He will do once he's sloughed his skin and once he's found some ladies. Once they've shed their skin, you do find them lying around the place. So this is a sloughed adder skin. Little tip for you: if you find a sloughed reptile skin that hasn't got legs, how do you know it's a snake and not a slow worm? So what you're looking at here is the underside, the belly of the snake, and you can see there's one scale spanning the entire width of the belly, different to the dorsal surface where you've got lots of small scales. So the fact that it's got one scale spanning the whole of the belly, that tells you it's a snake. It could be adder, could be grass snake. This isn't adder. But if it was a slow worm being a lizard, the scalation going across its belly would be the same as on its dorsal surface. So if you find a sloughed reptile skin without any legs, sometimes they're a bit inside out, like somebody's taken off a pair of tights. They're a bit like that sometimes. But if it's got the same scalation all the way around, then it's a slow worm. If it's got these broad belly scales, then it's a snake. Okay? You didn't know that, did you? I hope not. So there's a male adder after he's sloughed his skin, so he can look very, very different to before they slough the skin. You can see what the confusion is then with people thinking the mucky males are females. So you've just basically got much more obvious demarcation between the dorsal color, in this case, like a very silvery white in this case, and the black zigzag. Okay, but a lot of variation in color and pattern. Here's a female. That's a park slip female, Rose. That's from your time, back then, around that period. I think the female's more beautiful. There's a lot of more variation of color with them. The ground color is always more rich. So this is a bit of quite a classic female, I guess. Brown rather than black zigzag. The zigzag tends to be fainter and narrower than the male, but that's not always the case. There's lots of variation again. But yeah, generally there's more richness in the ground color of the females. I've seen some that are really rich, deep ginger as well. Absolutely stunning. So you can see they've got red irises to the eyes, and this can vary as well. A very dark snake will have a very, very dark iris. It's almost black, though you can still see the red tinge. But just like with people, it varies greatly. And the slit pupil, vertical pupil there, like a cat's eye pupil, different to a grass snake, which is round. Okay. People are always deliberating about whether this snake in the picture is a male or a female and such and such and such, because you get textbook examples and then you get others that, just like with people, just like with every other species, that haven't read the books and it might look a bit different. But on the whole, you can see the males have these black frames to the rostral scale, which is those scales that you can see on the snout that are encircled with the red there. And the female tends to have nothing or a lot less, and it's quite often a gingery frame around it if she does have it. Okay, but there's far other more, well, there's methods I use to tell them apart, such as the body shape, but that comes more with time. So males have got longer, narrower tails. Females have got shorter, stumpier tails and longer bodies. That sounds crazy, but yeah, that is the case. It's the same with lizards. Lizards have got longer bodies, the females, and shorter tails. That's for obvious reasons, because they have to carry the young inside them. So the torsos are longer and the tails are shorter. Okay. There's some Gower adders. It's a courting couple. That's a male. You can see he's quite a bit smaller than female. She's what I describe as a blonde adder. She's very, very blonde, very pale. And he's just starting the courtship. Romance is still alive in the case of snakes. There's a lot of tongue flicking, that kind of business. That's what's going on here. A lot of head shaking and wobbling. I didn't intrude into the privacy any further than that. You'll have to look elsewhere for that. This is mate guarding. So generally males will hang around a female. You can see what's happening there. You can see he's also flattened himself to soak up as much sun as possible. In this case, this is down in England, and they're using a patch of lichen, which is heated up by the sun quicker than other vegetation. They're using that as a little sunroom in between the heather, and he's basically flattened himself to increase his surface as much as possible and hence be more effective at heating up as quickly as possible. He's guarding the female. It doesn't work, as many times when other males will take advantage of it. Like he'll go chasing another male off, and a little tiny weedy male will sneak in and do the deed while he's busy being macho in the background. So it just doesn't work, but it happens all the time, this behavior, and it's interesting to see in the spring. That's a young adder. He's probably in its second year, and you can see it's having no trouble whatsoever swallowing an adult viviparous or common lizard. They can dislocate the jaw, so they don't have to have particularly small prey to start off with. Yeah, there you go. The proof's in the pudding. People speculate about them eating things like insects and grasshoppers and stuff. I really don't think that's the case. We know they do eat baby frogs. And adults tend to turn their noses up at frogs, but the babies often will eat frogs, and they don't need to use venom to envenomate the frogs. Okay. While I'm talking about venom, so the adder doesn't have venom to make our lives miserable. The adder has venom because it's an incredibly advanced method of dealing with its prey. So the grass snake is not venomous. Why isn't the grass snake venomous? The grass snake eats predominantly upon things like frogs, newts, toads, fish, baby birds, nothing that can give a retaliatory bite. Okay, so it doesn't need it. The adder eats a lot of lizards and small reptiles, etc., but it also, some populations feed exclusively on voles. So adders regularly predate small mammals. Now, voles have got a serious set of teeth on them, and they could really do a serious injury to an adder. If it didn't kill it outright, it could very possibly die of infection afterwards. So the venom is a highly evolved technique to secure their prey without having to suffer an injury, potentially fatal injury. So they literally tag the animal extremely quickly, blink and you miss it. The vole will then stagger off, keel over a bit further away. Then the adder starts tongue flicking, follows the pheromone trail with its tongue, and can feed in safety upon the vole, knowing it's not going to get chomped. So that is why adders are venomous. No other reason than that. Certainly nothing to do with us or our dogs, nothing whatsoever at all. They're under threat everywhere. All our reptiles are. Habitat loss, habitat fragmentation. I'm sure you've heard all about this. There's various different ways it gets degraded. There's the list for you. I won't bother reading it out. You can all read. But fragmentation combined with loss and degradation means it's just an ever-decreasing circle for them, to be honest. And as far as reptiles are concerned, adders are the least effective at colonizing new habitats or recolonizing old habitats. Okay, so whereas a grass snake will travel across literally any habitat, it doesn't stop it. That's why you see more of them run over. An adder really very rarely will bother crossing a road unless it's absolutely forced to, and they're not comfortable crossing habitat that they're not comfortable with. So they're really bad at recolonizing. They're the first reptile to disappear from a site generally, and they're the last, if ever, to recolonize. So they need help. Collection, would you believe? Hardcore enthusiasts collecting adders. I actually caught somebody doing that down in England, red-handed once. Somewhere where there was a lot of melanistic, pure black adders, and there were some European chaps there catching them and taking them away, basically. Persecution and disturbance. So persecution, you get, not everybody is as broad-minded and understanding about a venomous snake as you people hopefully are, and you do get adder vigilantes that feel it's their purpose in life to go around killing them. And then just disturbance. So they're very popular with photographers, and especially upon emergence time when they come out of hibernation. If you know the minimum about adders and where they like to hibernate, it's quite easy to find adders when they've emerged from hibernation. And people tend to not put the animals first and get carried away with enthusiasm and constantly crowding around trying to get pictures. Now, at this time of the year, the animals are supposed to be basking as much as possible, as I've said, to take on UV and develop viable sperm. If they keep getting made to go in and out of hiding, then they're not going to get a chance to do that, and it's going to affect the year's breeding. They're not going to get enough chance to get up to their full functionality. Okay, so there's a lot of disturbance that they suffer from, normally from us and our dogs. Yeah, that's a horrible picture of a warning sign about adders and how some people react to it. Sorry if it's a bit gory, but that's the plain and simple truth. So we and I experience signs of adders. It's a very, very tricky subject. Sometimes, in certain situations, it's better if the people carry on blissfully unaware. Other times, like what the lady was describing earlier, you have to do something about it, especially if there's a lot of adders in close proximity. But it's often better to do it the way we did with the university design, to try and anthropomorphize a little, because some people they can't stand looking at a photograph of a snake. So that's what Adam the Adder was all about. So people didn't have to see a snake. It really doesn't look like a snake. It looks like some kind of cuddly worm with bulgy eyes to me. There you go. Pheasants, I won't talk about pheasants at the minute because it get my blood boiling, but they're a heck of an influence upon all kinds of native wildlife, not just reptiles. Free-range cats, roads, say no more. Okay. Trends in management. So unfortunately, reptiles, because very few people see them, they very often don't consider them, even the good guys. And I'm not blaming anybody for this, but there's lots of mistakes in wildlife management where reptiles are not considered for that reason. And lots of really good projects will have key target species that are declining and really need our help. A lot of the times, though, it doesn't coincide with reptile habitat needs, but we've been talking with each other, and generally the theme is if you can do a mosaic and allow edges to stay in place to allow connectivity, then none of these projects matter. It's just when there's whole scale blanket destruction of edges and structural diversity, not allowing corridors to go in place. But thankfully, all the conservation NGOs are now talking to each other a lot better than we used to before and working together. So remember, ectothermic. What do reptiles need if you're reliant on a completely and utterly, totally reliant on an external heat source to function, and you live in Wales? Okay, so you need open areas and vegetation cover in close proximity to each other. So lots of small opportunities for microclimate. Varied topography if possible, so lots of undulations. Diverse vegetation structure, ideally not over a meter. Very, very complex vegetation structure, providing lots of edges and pockets of microhabitat. Tiny little heat traps, well below human head heights. It's a totally different world, okay? So these microhabitats provide everything the reptiles need, which is a range of thermoregulation opportunities, a range of places that they can bask at different times of the day as the sun's moving around. Shelter from predators, shelter from wind. So the wind can really reduce the temperatures for basking reptiles. An abundance of prey, which tends to be present in the same habitat. And this is something that people forget about: opportunities to cool down in humid, deeper vegetation when the weather is hot and dry, like today, for example. So, they're ectothermic. They need to reach their functioning heat, but they just can't keep going. They'll get brain damage. They can't heat up eternally. They need to move away as well. So, as I know, it's pretty rare in this country for that to happen, but it does. And it was very hot today. Here's an example in Bridgend, and there's my former colleague. You can just about spot him, Mark, at the top in the middle there, staring at the ground, walking around in circles like he often does. So do I. And there you've got aspect, so a slope, which provides the posh terminology for this is thermal momentum. It heats up quickly, okay, because of the slope. You've got gorse, mosaic there. It's not a thick, unbroken stand of gorse, is it? It's patchy stands of it, interspersed with bits of bracken, Molinia, that kind of stuff. Okay, so a very complex, diverse vegetation structure producing all kinds of edges and opportunities and microclimates for an ectothermic creature. And it's all on a slope, south-facing slope. So that's really good habitat for reptiles. Particularly adders is another example of the same kind of habitat for you. But it's always variations on a theme. Okay, you'll see this. So this is Bridgend, inland reptile habitat. Biggest danger for this is fires. It's the biggest threat to this kind of habitat. Here's an adder there, actually photographed at the same spot. So they don't want to be seen. So these mosaic basking, there's an adder there. It's completely aware of the photographer. There's its eye. Can you see its eye in the circle? It's looking straight at me as I took a picture. It knows I'm there. But very often they don't want to be seen and people miss them. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Here's some Gower coastal habitat. Variation on a theme there. Okay, you haven't got the bracken, but you've got lots of patchy gorse interspersed with bare ground, rocky escarpments, lots of opportunities to get below the frost line there. Okay, so when it's winter time, they can get down in all these nooks and crannies and hibernate below the frost line. And when they crawl out for emergency, then wallop, they're straight in the sun instantly. This is what they need. Inland on the Gower coast, this is kind of habitat that needs managing more often. So this is lightly grazed. But you can see very, very tussocky Molinia grass there, which provides superb conditions, microclimates and opportunities for reptiles on their scale. Okay. And you see it's on a woodland or scrub edge. So edges, you'll hear me say this a few times, edges are disproportionately important for reptiles, edges, and most commonly seen edges, or commonly not seen edges as well. So there's a young female adder. You can see she's got a milky eye. She's going to slop her skin, and she's right in the heart of a Molinia tussock there. Okay, not out really obvious, hard to see, but she's still soaking up the sun with some mosaic or cryptic basking behavior. Okay. This is up in Pembrokeshire. This is in between Newport and Fishguard, some coastal cliff habitat. Same kind of thing going on there, you see. So it gets a bit windy and chilly up there, but because of the vegetation structure, you've got lots of opportunities for something living at ground level, not 6 foot high like me with my head up in clouds, something down at ground level to take opportunities to escape from the wind and seek these heat traps. Okay. This is Torvine. No gorse there, inland, but you can see mature heather clumps, nothing more than 1 meter high, interspersed with bare patches, little sunrooms for basking, full of voles, full of lizards, undulating terrain, producing lots of opportunities for ectothermic animals to bask. So variations on a theme, okay? Different plant species, similar structure, similar topography. And here's my favorite, sand dune. Same, another variation on that same theme again. There's no gorse there, there's no bracken, there's no heather, no bramble. It's marram grass, but it's mature, dense marram grass, no more than 1 meter high, dense, full of invertebrates, interspersed with sand. Now, this is the ultimate for reptiles. Sand. Everybody knows how hot sand gets on the beach. So those little charge up sunrooms you can see dotted about everywhere in between the vegetation, they're super charged spots. So the reptile sits on there, it's going to be charged and ready to go again within minutes, okay, because it gets heated up so well. And you've got undulating terrain. So on the dunes. You've got it's created, literally created by the wind and the sea, movements of the sea and the wind. And it's very dynamic. You get erosion and accretion, so it's a dynamic, evolving habitat if it's a healthy dune, and we haven't messed it up, that is. And so it's ideal for reptiles. You can be standing on the top of a dune and it can be blowing a gale, and you can go down behind the dune, a south-facing bank, and you experience what I call an atmospheric gear change. It's completely different, and that's the world that the reptiles inhabit. So edges and interfaces, I'm going to waffle on about that a bit more because it's just so important for them. They're transitional zones. It's ecotone is a posh word for it if you want to get ecological, but just call them edges or interfaces. It's where you've got the greatest diversity of plant species, invertebrate assemblage, all of that. But for reptiles, practically, they can bask in the sun, and then it's never more than a very short, sharp dash or slither to safety. Okay. Lots of examples: sunny woodland edges, so not so much the woodland itself, but the edge of it, grassland scrub edges, interfaces of grassland and different sward heights. So you can see it at the bottom left. It's literally, there's a fence causing a difference in vegetation structure there. So it's greys to the right of it, and then it's more tussocky along the actual fence line. And behind it, you've got little patches of vegetation, a mosaic, which is producing edges itself. There's edges everywhere on the other side of the fence. Okay. And on the top right, that's a very suburban habitat. That's in suburban Swansea. No adders there. There used to be, but all the other reptile species are there. And as you can see, that's an edge again. They're structurally diverse, so what little management goes on there, all the brash piles are left there, as you can see, often covered in lizards. It would be ideal for adders if they were still there, but they've disappeared. So hibernation sites are critical, and this is something that we train our volunteers to be able to identify, recognize and identify. So they have to be frost-free, obviously. Humid, but not wet. So if you're below ground, then it's humid. Lots of people who keep reptiles in captivity have problems with them, with respiratory issues, because it's too dry in a centrally heated home. They need the humidity. Okay. Safe from flooding. So normally quite high on raised ground, but not always. Safe from predators. That's difficult these days with rats. Rats can squeeze into most places, and hibernating reptiles are very vulnerable to them. And thermal momentum, that posh way of saying it warms up quickly. So generally with an aspect south-facing, southwest. Typical sites, structurally diverse banks. Okay, burrows dug by other species such as rabbits. That enables reptiles to get to ground and below the frost line easily. Rotted tree stumps, root holes, large grass tussocks in the case of smaller reptiles and juvenile snakes like the millennia tussocks you saw. Ant hills also for smaller reptiles. Old walls, and yeah, basically abandoned human structures. They're renowned for being taken advantage of by reptiles for hibernation sites. So old foundations and crumbling old walls, they provide multiple opportunities to get below the frost line. Okay, so they can be really useful for reptile hibernation sites. Under large logs and fallen trees. So they may possibly hibernate singly, but very often, because it's difficult to find these suitable conditions, you get them hibernating communally. It's not because they want to be with their best mates, it's just because those conditions are hard to find. They're critical features for reptiles. The trouble is they can sometimes be damaged whilst occupied, and while often that could be inadvertent, that could even be done by the good guys, conservation NGOs, not knowing what's there. Because to be fair, and not to go pointing fingers at anyone, to be fair, adder hibernation sites, they don't jump out at you. They're not the most remarkable pieces for habitat. There's something that you need to know the key features of to recognize, and it could be easily overlooked. Okay. So that's why we've been liaising a lot more with other conservation NGOs and offering training similar to this to how to recognize hibernation sites. So if you can imagine, you've got most of your population below ground, and then it gets minced up, or all the vegetation gets removed from it. Then if they don't get that photograph, that was a wildlife trust. It doesn't matter which one it was, down in England, and that's what happened to the other hibernation. So it just got butchered. It was totally inadvertent. It was because of lack of communication. No one to blame other than the lack of communications and understandings. But this is why we try and let people know more about this kind of stuff. So you could either decimate it like that, or you could just remove all the vegetation, meaning that when the adders emerge in the spring, there's no vegetated cover to conceal them, and they get picked off by aerial predators really quickly. There you go. So it's pretty tough being an adder in modern Britain, if I'm honest. This is Caerphilly, and this is a natural adder hibernaculum, so nothing jumping out at you there, other than it's a south-facing bank. It happens to be structurally diverse, so you've got some wind-stunted gorse there. The thing about gorse is that its root structures creates all kinds of cracks and fissures below ground, lots of opportunities for little tight spots that are below frost line for adders to use as hibernation caves, if you like. So the root systems of those plants often provide that, and it's on a slope, like it's covered in moss. So even though that bracken you can see there, by the time the summer comes, it would be covered in bracken. An emergence time in early spring, when adders come out, the bracken's dead and all that moss is exposed to the sun, and it's perfect for emergent adders to bask. Later on in the year, it'd be too shaded, but by then the adders would have moved off elsewhere to the foraging grounds for the summer. So this is a classic bit of habitat used as hibernation area in Caerphilly, and that's a juvenile that I photographed at that exact site that you just saw the same day I took that picture. Basically hanging down from the top, it can reel itself back in anytime it wants, and you can see there's lots of moss surrounding it, lots of warmth holding vegetation. This is back in Torvine and the heathland, upland heathland there, and you can see this is a south-facing furrow bathed in sunlight. Again, extensive mature root systems of the heather provides opportunities to get below the ground, and they've got this lovely basking opportunity above ground. Not easy to spot, so they don't want to be seen, but that's exactly the same spot that we've just seen. If you can see him there in the middle, closer view, there he is. Okay, they don't want to be seen. This is Newport Talbot. This is following along a track edge. Remember what I keep going on about edges, edges. Okay, they're so important for reptiles. When people walk past this, they don't look at the ground or the fence post. They're looking straight forward, or they're driving straight forward, and they haven't got a clue what's next to them. So all the way along that bank, you can see tussocky grass at the base of the fence posts. You tend to get adders basking there on emergence time, and then they shoot back into the fencing out of harm's way if they feel disturbed. And I would say the hibernation area is obviously, and that bank of a hedge is obviously in the root systems there of the hedge itself. Again, in the summer, that's going to be covered in leaves and it's going to be shaded. The adders won't be there in the summer. They will have migrated out towards the foraging grounds. But in the spring, when they emerge, and in the autumn, when they go back to hibernation, the leaves have dropped and they can bask there and thermoregulate. So if that makes sense to you, you know, the seasons change, so do habitats, adders move along with it. Okay. There's an animal in that situation surrounded by stinging nettles, and they are, or they appear to be affected by stinging nettles. I've seen them flinching and jerking a few times, so they just need to pick their spot carefully. They don't stand out. This is on a bank. There's one there. There's another one there. There's another one there. Okay, so yeah, they don't want to be seen. They take some spotting, but once your eye's in for it, you tend to be. You don't have to have particularly good eyes. I'm blind as a bat, but when I go out looking for reptiles, I can spot them. You don't have to have particularly good eyes. You have to have well-trained eyes, if that makes any sense. You have to know what you're looking for, and you have to be used to being still and giving your brain the opportunity to digest the information that your eyes are taking from this cryptic little creature basking amongst all kinds of potentially hidden bits of vegetation, etc. So yeah, you need to just slow down and train yourself for it, really. And don't worry if you've got poor eyesight. I have. This is Pembrokeshire, another edge, an extreme example of an edge for you. Okay, so humans tend to be driving past there, hopefully looking where they're going rather than the hedge. And people that do walk past there tend to be few and far between, and they tend to just want to keep going and not get run over. But as you can see, it's well bathed in sunlight, and you can see those bare patches midway between the grass kind of curb and the actual hedge itself. You can see those bare patches where it's quite concave. So there's an adder precisely there, okay, right next to the road. And there's quite a few animals use that hibernation site, and then they move inland away from it later on in the year. There's another one there, beautiful ginger female, same site. Variations on a theme. So here's another Pembrokeshire hedgerow. Same thing going there. Now this is a particularly good hibernaculum. I first spotted adders there February 2013, and it's not a busy road. It's a really, really slow, narrow country lane. And I have to admit, I was driving along very slowly with the window open to the van and spotting adders from the car. And the volunteer had his GPS, and we were literally logging them whilst we were crawling along with the van without even getting out the van. You could see them. They're at the same height as us. We're sat in the vehicle looking out, and they're in that midway zone beneath the hedge and above the grass curb in the sun there. And it's not just adders you see there. All four widespread species of reptiles utilize that. So there's a male adder there. He's slothed, but he's not easy to spot. He's mosaic basking again. Part of him's concealed, part of him's exposed. Okay, that way they don't have to keep moving in and out of cover. They can bask and stay still for a very long time, conserving energy and soaking up the sun without getting spotted. Okay, there's a lizard at the same spot. Back to the dunes, my favourite. This is on the Gower, so variations on a theme again. This is an adder hibernation site. Doesn't leap out at you other than the fact that it is a slope. It's structurally diverse. You've got those little sandy sunrooms. There is an adder in the picture, believe it or not. Again, mature marram has got extensive, significant root systems, and it's in sand, so there's lots of opportunity below to get below ground, below the frost line there. And then there's the supercharged sandy sunrooms. When they're emerging, they can charge up so quickly and effectively. Let's zoom in. There's the adder, and let's zoom in again. There it is. Okay, so using that sand patch to literally get heat from below and above at the same time. He's looking very dark. I say he, that is a male. I know him individually. He's looking very dark. He hasn't shed his skin yet. It's early. He's not long been out of hibernation. There he is again. You can see his eyes quite cloudy, not fully cloudy. So he's either very close to sloughing or he hasn't gone through the full cloudy stage yet. But he'll look a lot brighter once he's sloughed, and the demarcation between his background colour and his zigzag will be more obvious. Can you see those rostral scales around the mouth we looked at earlier? He's got heavy black framing of them. Everything about him shouts out male. He's a screamingly obvious male adder. There's a female at the same site later on in the year. You can see she's flattening part of her body to soak up the sun, as much sun as possible. She's on quite a steep gradient there, so that's a real power hit. She'll charge up really quickly, and then she'll use the stems, the emergent stems of the marram grass to make her escape if she needs to very quickly. This is a heap of male adders at the entrance to a hibernation site on the dunes. Sometimes you count the heads, but you still get it wrong. It's very difficult. So they lump together like that, just like penguins do. A bigger biomass conserves heat for longer. And this is in spring when they've just emerged. The air temperature's cool in general. They've found a good spot to thermoregulate. They don't want to be moving around any more than they have to. So they just want to bask there for as long as possible, soak up as much heat, start their systems functioning, soak up as much ultraviolet light as possible so they can develop viable sperm ready for the females who will be emerging soon. So here we go again. There's one, there's a couple more, and there's a big heap of them. So they don't jump out at you, and this is right at the edge of a path that everybody walks past all the time. I wish they'd put the dogs on the lead more often there, and then it'd be less accidents. It's interesting to hear somebody say dogs with bells. I'm not sure how that will work because snakes don't have external ears. They feel vibrations through the ground. So basically, if you can do heavy footprints when you think there's adders stomping around, the exact opposite of what I'm doing when I'm trying to creep up on them, then that's your best bet. I'm not dissing the adders, the dogs of bells things. I don't know enough about it, but adders do not have external ears. So I don't know how they'd pick up on that unless it was the vibration traveling through the dog. We'll see. I guess bells are pretty vibrating things, aren't they, though, rather than just a sound? Who knows? So we have to manage habitat for them. Apart from cases such as sand dunes and heathlands where you've got much lower nutrient levels, most other reptile habitats in the absence of natural factors, so we don't have things like huge herbivores anymore, we don't have predators managing them, we don't have beavers, we don't have any natural processes going on. We didn't even understand them before we destroyed them. So in the absence of that, we have to intervene. Otherwise, most reptiles habitat doesn't stay reptile habitat for long, aside from those coastal habitats and the heathland ones I told you about, where it's got poorer nutrients in the soil. So neither extreme you can see here is favourable for reptiles. So on the left, there's just completely exposure, no chance to thermoregulate, no microclimates, no vegetation for prey, no way to cool down either if it got too hot. Okay, so that's just no good at all. Far right is too shaded, so we need something in between for reptiles. Mid-successional stage is best. That's an example of tussocky grass, which is great for reptiles. Lots of ground level opportunities for microclimates and thermoregulation, and then grazed to death by ponies there. No opportunities at all. They're just showing you two extremes. It's just something we did. Rose will remember that. It was a pine plantation, very dark, not much life in there, very acidic. We ploughed our way through there, made a south-facing ride adjacent to an existing ride. All the timber that we dropped and the root balls we pulled out, we put in a massive, structurally diverse brash pile running the whole length on the south-facing side of it. So it was wide enough, the ride, so that it would receive sunlight, also protected from the wind by the remaining trees, and structurally diverse all the way along its edge because of the brash piles. There you go. That's what it looked like a year later. Got lizards there straight away, and grass snakes, slowworms, and adders, and all kinds of stuff. Sad to see, since COVID, it's been a bit neglected and it's overgrown now, but I'm nagging the new management relentlessly, and hopefully we'll be able to reinstate it. So before we finish up, just show an example of typical Welsh adder habitat. Inland Welsh habitat then. I spend a lot of time in coastal habitats. They vary. You've seen the various different slides earlier, variations on a theme, but this is a classic inland Welsh habitat. So you've got south-facing gorse bank, rocky areas as well. Rocky areas then tends to indicate shallow soil, and that's likely to have hibernacula present because of the labyrinth-like caves you can get in those situations. Okay, as well as basking areas because of the bare rock surrounded by vegetation. Remember what I said about gorse roots breaking ground up and creating opportunities below ground. So all those factors combined, that bank is almost certainly going to provide hibernation opportunities. Okay. And number 2 shows the interface. Guess what that is? That's an edge. That's the edge between the gorse and the grass, and that's where you'll find them a lot of the time basking. And below that, you've got lots of wet, tusky grassland. Lots of prey for adders there, frogs, lizards, voles, and lots of opportunities to bask on top of a tussock in the middle of foraging in case they got a bit wet and damp, and they can just bask on top of a tussock, heat up again, and then off they go. And to the right, number 4, well-vegetated hedge banks. So they're really important because they provide connectivity corridors and allow reptiles and all kinds of other species to migrate across what's otherwise pretty hostile habitat. Okay, so the Long Forest is a great project, restoring hedgerows. They're really important for reptiles as well as everything else. I've banged off on enough about it, I think, for tonight. If we'd like to talk about surveying again, maybe we could. In the meantime, if you do see them, or anything else for that matter, the scaly skin, then that's one of the simplest ways of recording them. We share it with absolutely everyone. But we get to see it first, and seeing as we're the ones going around tweaking habitat, it can be pretty informative for us to do that. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'll shut up now. Any questions, far away.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Pete. It was lush looking at all of those again, all the pictures from back in the day. The one thing, yeah, if people are going to go out looking for reptiles before we perhaps come back to you and get some survey techniques, is Pete walks around with his hands sort of clamped together behind his back. That's the best way to look for reptiles, isn't it? So you're not tempted to point if you do see a reptile and scare it away.
I call it my Prince Charles walk. Just
Yeah,
literally
that's
holding my
exactly
hand
it.
stuck
You've
together.
just got to channel the king while you're looking for reptiles. That's brilliant. So has anyone got any questions for Pete? You can put them in the chat, put your hand up, or just unmute yourself and come in. Or Marie.
I thought I'd kick things off this evening. That's okay. I have quite a lot of questions, but I'm going to sort of hold back a little bit. You were talking about how some of the others will travel for to actually go and sort of go to the hunting ground, as it were, from the hibernaculum. Do we know how far they go from the hibernaculum then, or?
It all depends on the individual situation. I mean, there are situations on the Gower where the high binocular, they're there all year round because the vegetation doesn't shade it, etc. So it really depends on the individual situation. But in other situations, they have to. They've got no choice but to move from there, and they need to follow where the prey is and where the sunshine is. But they're not great travelers, not compared to grass snakes. But then within the species, males tend to be, that's the same with all reptiles, males tend to be more on the move. Females tend to be more sedentary. So it tends to be males that might suddenly break away and go and look for another colony or something like that, rather than the females. Yeah, but distances vary greatly. I'd be very unwise to give you a standard reply to that. It really depends on the individual situation and the individual animals. But males certainly are capable of traveling hundreds and hundreds of meters. Others just don't bother. They're individuals.
So do they tend to reuse the same hibernacular then throughout their lives, their lifespan, I want to say, but
Yes, like some of the ones that I know are ancient. They've been used for millennia. Limestone outcrops, etc., that are really cavernous, like a labyrinth below ground. Um, it's hard to find a decent hibernation site, so once they have done, they tend to be faithful to it. Yeah.
I'm going to be quiet now because I have more questions, but I want to give opportunities to other people to talk.
Feel free.
Well, Melissa.
I was just wondering, what is the average, this might be tricky, average lifespan of an adder? If it weren't, predated or anything like that. In a perfect world, how long would an adder like to live?
Well, that's the problem. You see, it's not a perfect world. So in the wild, they're incredibly short-lived these days because there's so many pressures upon them. I didn't dwell on it when I put the slide up, but there's so many pressures against them. But in captivity, they can live for a quarter of a century, if not more.
It'd be nice if they lived that long in the wild. Go on, Marie, if you've got more questions.
Just because people are going quiet in a second. It might sound like a silly question, but can they actually take the heat off each other? When you were showing them sort of basking together, do they actually absorb the heat from each other?
Of course they do. It's not a silly question at all. That's why you saw a whole heap of them in a heap. And sometimes you find mixed species, particularly under survey refugia. You'll find things that might normally, I mean, adders can predate slow worms, but sometimes you'll find adders and slow worms wrapped up in a ball. If the adder's full of food, it's not hungry, and they both need to be soaking up the heat, then you'll see grass snakes with them. I've seen adders basking next to lizards upon emergence because they've just woken up from hibernation and they're not hungry, and they're literally soaking the heat up off each other. Absolutely, just like penguins do.
Very sociable.
Not really sociable. No. especially if they're hungry.
Necessary evil sometimes.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Our fab presentation page, really
Thank you.
interesting, well explained and funny. I'm wondering about the soil. You didn't mention, or did you mention about the soil, like acidic, peatland? Is there different types of soil they're more keen on or not?
Doesn't matter really. Doesn't matter really. And they don't seem to be so keen on clay soils, possibly because it holds water and which doesn't go well with hibernation if you're going to get flooded out. But like I say, I find them on sand dunes, sand. I find them on
And dry.
peat
But
bogs,
peat, I was thinking about peatland, like kind of peat.
yeah, peat bogs. Yeah, I find
Peatland.
them on peat
Peat,
bogs.
right.
They tend to use the tussocky vegetation, and they tend to use any raised areas within that, such as hedgerows, etc. Just like the Pembrokeshire hibernacula I showed you earlier on, that's really flat there, Darrell Common. So they basically use the hedgerows all the time, anywhere that can lift them up above it. Soil quality isn't so important. Obviously, just the richer it is, the more likely the climax vegetation is going to shade them out. That's when we try to manage it for them. So yeah, they just seem to avoid clayey soils. That seems to be the only one that they avoid.
Okay, thank you. And why are certain areas, like Glencorrig has got like areas, is that because they're quite wild and there's like huge expansive areas? Or is it because it slopes?
What do you mean exactly?
I don't know, well
Why is
that's
it good
all I
for
know.
others?
But I know it's just certain areas we're talking about. You're saying the
Everything we
coastline.
spoke about, everything we spoke about in the presentation. So if you've got varied topography, lots of undulations combined with south-facing aspects, combined with structural diversity at ground level, be that vegetation structure variation or scree, rocky habitats, that kind of stuff. If it's rocky, it tends to mean the soil's thin. It tends to mean there's like a labyrinth structure below ground. You've got to have all these factors added up together. And then there's a massive one, which is important, a lack of disturbance from humans. Okay. So yeah, that edges, they might be hiding from humans, but we're still going along next to them.
Okay, thank you.
Melissa?
Possibly maybe a difficult one, maybe, but I was just curious because I know it would depend on the prey size, but how often and how much would they need to eat? I don't know much about reptiles in terms of food and how much they eat. All I know is that sometimes, like a pet snake might eat a mouse kind of once a week or something. Is there something comparable? Are these on the hunt every day if they're just consuming, say, for example, voles? Do they need one a day or one enough for a few days? Or does it depend on the season as well, I'm guessing, and their activity?
Pretty much everything you've said. It's not a silly question at all. Now, they don't eat daily. An average sized adult adder would probably need a vole a week, something along those lines, but I doubt whether it does actually work out like that for various different reasons, because the weather's not always right. So if it's not warm enough, they can't digest their food. So you know what the weather's like here. There'll be lots of interruptions to their cycles. So, 1 week's not the same as the next. It depends on the individual year. It's all very weather dependent. This is solar powered animals. So when a female adder is gravid or full of young, they're live bearing, they don't lay eggs, they get very, very full up. And about halfway through the gestation period, there literally is no room for them to feed. There's no room to food in the stomach. It's just full of baby snake. So at that point, they're not feeding at all. And they're desperate to get rid of what is really a burden to them. And that's a time of year, we're just coming up to now, July, August. And I'll start getting emails and phone calls from people on holiday at coastal locations where there's tarmac car parks, and the female adders full of babies just cannot resist the draw of hot tarmac on the edge, and they'll bask on it because it really will help them speed up their gestation period. And there might be, I don't know, three female snakes. So I get emails saying that there's 20 or 30 snakes invading the car park. They're they're thermoregulating. They want to get rid of their burden. As soon as they drop their babies, they disappear again, and you never see them again till the next year, or probably the year after, because breeding every year takes too much out of them. It's every other year generally with adders. So yeah, if the weather's right and everything's tickety-boo, a vole a week, but it doesn't work out like that because of weather and various other factors which take away that vole a week. If you see what I'm saying.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Just made me think, Pete, if with all the weather we've had this year, where it's been just constant rain, do you think it's going to be a bad breeding season, or might pull it back?
I don't think it'll be the best, but I'm always amazed every time this happens. I'm always amazed at how reptiles, and I'm thinking about sand lizards, which are egg laying as well, how they seem to be able to catch up. They don't seem to be behind schedule. So I think reptiles take advantage of the slightest opportunities that we're not even aware of because we're tucked away in bed or beneath fluorescent strip lights in front of a computer or something like that. They take up literally every opportunity they can, be it a half-hour stint or a 2-hour stint or a half a day stint, and they do build up levels because I'm not seeing them being behind. I know what you're saying, and I've often worried about that with previous bizarre weather fronts we've had, but they seem to manage to cope and be able to catch up somehow or other. They're very tough reptiles, British reptiles, really tough animals, particularly adders.
They have to be, don't they?
Mm.
Thank you. Go on, Marie, you got another one?
Yes, it's just something you just said now about, how if they can't get the heat going, obviously everything sort of makes the things more difficult for them. So are they able to sort of slow down their digestion? So if they've eaten a vole, like you said, and then they can't get their body temperature to rise, then does it mean that their body sort of naturally slows down and
they haven't got much choice. There's less likelihood of that happening for any extensive amount of time at this time of year, and it's normally warm enough background heat to be able to cope with that. But that's why they stop feeding quite early before hibernation, so there's no risk of going into hibernation with undigested food in the stomach because it would rot and it would kill them. But yeah, they are able to an extent, but not like a mammal can. Not like we can. We can just process everything so much quicker. We're the sports model. We have to be taking on fuel all the time, and they're the economy model. They don't have to take on fuel anywhere near as often. Much better at recovering from injuries. They can recover from injuries that a mammal would definitely not survive from. Much less prone to infection, etc. So there's advantages and disadvantages to being ectothermic, but that's one of them that you've just raised. Yeah, absolutely.
So, if we were talking about habitats just now and where they're more likely to sort of find suitable grounds for, hunting, breeding, etc. If you, for instance, had a clearing inside of a broadleaf woodland, would that be likely to be somewhere where you would find them?
Absolutely. If it was connected. So you'd need rides, ideally east-west orientated so that they were south-facing. Yeah. You'd need rides and glades. That's exactly the kind of habitat that they would survive in. Yeah, very much so. Lots of edge. You're creating edge there. It's not just reptiles that benefit from edge. I'm always bagging on about edges because literally everything benefits from them. You get teneral dragonflies, so teneral freshly emerged dragonflies that are soft-bodied and vulnerable instead of hanging around a pond where they'll get the hell beaten out of them by other dragonflies. They like to find south-facing rides where they roost and harden up, and it's where you find the greatest diversity of invertebrates and floristic diversity as well along edges, sunlit edges and rides. So yeah, glades and rides through woodlands, absolutely superb. You're creating edge habitat, which is one of the most fertile habitats there is.
Can I ask one last thing, and I promise I should have them in my last one.
Carry on.
You were talking about sand dunes as well as habitat for them. Do they get affected much? Because obviously sand dunes, and we know, sort of tend to move, don't they? So do they get affected by that as well, or do they just like move on wherever is more suitable for them?
You got to be careful here because sand dunes is my pet subject, so I will have to rein myself in. But if the sand dune is functioning as it should be due to aeolian processes manufactured by the wind and the sea, then you will get a constant dynamism of erosion. Like there's a storm and it will pull a chunk of dune away, and accretion, where you've got embryo dunes forming elsewhere, and then behind them frontal dunes, and behind them fixed dunes, and so on and so forth. So those are the two extremes, and then you've got everything in between those two extremes when you think of an eroded area starting to heal, for example. So dunes are constantly, if they're healthy dunes, constantly a patchwork of various different stages of habitat, if I'm making sense. Climax being fixed dune, and then right down at the bottom, the strand line embryo dunes or recent erosion. And then you've got blowouts. Do you know what I mean by blowout? Big chunks, big holes in the sand where the wind's taking it out. That delivers sand all the way around it. So it creates lots of opportunities for thermoregulation at the same time as being destructive in the first instance. So yeah, if you're asking if they have to be adaptable on dunes, I guess they do more than on other habitats. But the thing is, if they lost a hibernation site, another one's going to appear really quickly because it's such a dynamic habitat, and it's got sand there. So you've got the supercharged opportunities to heat up quicker than anywhere else you could in the UK, basically, on sand, sheltered sand. So yeah, the disadvantages of being on a dune are generally outweighed by the advantages when it comes to reptiles. There's a few different dune sites I know of that have got a reptile assemblage of all 5 of our Welsh reptile species. There's not many habitats you can say that about. Yeah, it really does lend itself to reptiles. Big start.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Real. All right, I think we might have exhausted the questions now, but if anyone does have any other questions, email them through to me or Chloe, and we can pass them on to Pete if you don't mind, Pete, if anyone does have anything else they haven't asked. But yeah, I've put
Can I just say something?
Yeah, of course.
Just when you were talking about earlier on, if you're going looking for reptiles in the Prince Charles Walk and everything, I've just got to say this is the worst time to go looking for reptiles. It's so hot at this time of year, you will just depress yourself. Seriously, anybody wants to go looking. It's a popular misconception that a hot sunny day is a day to go looking for reptiles. No, it isn't. It's a good day to be a reptile because you can function without having to expose yourself to predation, so you don't have to show yourself. So they're not visible. You can't see them. So please don't go looking for reptiles enthusiastically in July and August on a baking hot day. You'll get thoroughly depressed by it and you'll never want to do it ever again. Whereas if you wait until the spring or possibly the autumn, when cooler temperatures force reptiles to bask for longer, and in the spring there's less vegetation obscuring them, you'll have a lot more fun, and maybe we'll have another talk before then. But please don't go looking out in July and August. You will just depress yourself, unless you get up at the crack of dawn and get there ridiculously early, and you might see them for 10 minutes. But don't bother, please don't do it. Wait till April or May. They're the months.
Point. Maybe we'll do the a survey session then in March and get people if we can get you in front of a laptop in March. That's the only problem. February. Let's go earlier.
Well, evenings are good. Evenings are good because I can't. There's nothing going on there.
You can't go out. Yeah. I was just going to say, I put Adam the Adder that we talked about. There's a poster and there's a video that's narrated by Yolo and Chris Packham, and I put them in the chat if anyone's interested and want to share them amongst their communities as well, because they're really good. And there's a couple of people saying thank you very much as well for a fantastic presentation. So I'll say the same. Thank you very much, Pete. That was brilliant.
Welcome. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming along tonight. We can all